Welcome to the 57th video in the series, Foundations of Communist Organizing. Today we'll be going over the 1974 piece by the ICP, The Communist Party in the Tradition of the Left, Part 4, Party Development and Organic Centralism. I have subtitled this, Rigid Party Structure Hinders Adaptability, Limits Effectiveness. The party should have a center that issues instructions to a network of organizational circulars, utilizing frequent liaisons between the center and parts of the organization, which engage in party work, whilst receiving feedback from territorial sections, groups, and individual militants through rank and center, ergo, consulting the party rank and file. In addition, it should have periodic meetings for organizational minutiae via detailed reports, with the meetings' results being publicized in a party press. These findings should in turn be refined through collective work of contributors and publishers, as they are passed throughout the party for a fully developed understanding and agreement with the contents. Lastly, there should be a organ of trade union coordination in order to take hold of trade unions and all other forms of direct engagement with workers' direct economic struggles. As the party expands in size and thereby necessary complexity and intensity of activity, organizational measures in turn need to be taken to increase contact between the center and sectors so that management can become more effective, increasing coordination and centralization as needed as the organization increases in size and complexity. This increase requires a more stringent and active screening of militants, a greater degree of technical division of labor across a developed hierarchy of functions, and a continual increase in recursions maintaining these, which in turn develop as the party expands and needs them, rather than being pre-developed in expectation of them being necessary. This is because the activities come first, with the party supporting necessary activity that the working class carries out rather than being the decider of it. The form of organization in turn is dialectically linked with the activities the organization can carry out. According to the ICP, the party, acting as a prefiguration of communist society, should not have its structural integrity supported by statutes, that is to say rules, laws, or specialized machinery distinct from the social body. As an aside, this belief that communism will not have laws is in fact significantly contentious within Marxology, derived from conclusions drawn through implication. Marx clearly references a dictatorship as having the executive and legislative branches merged into one, and our democratic direction of the proletariat, who democratically elect judges and decide on laws. And he specifically states that every mode of production produces its own legal relations and laws. Ergo, communism as a mode of production would reasonably have these as well. In addition, Engels claimed that there would be an end of government of persons, replaced by the administration of things and processes of production. Hence, there would certainly be at least to some degree administrative law, even if in exclusivity. Lastly, Marx references interpersonal conflicts still existing, and thereby there would be some sort of arbitration system, even if vastly distinct from our own. And in the Communist Mode Production series' PowerPoints, I will try to work this in. I don't have much readings by way of particularities of this, but I think that I can make some sort of conclusions. I've talked to a variety of people about this who have read texts, and I'll try and get some grounding within Marxist law. Okay, continuing. So this concept that the party would not have structural integrity supported by internal laws is one that is not necessarily applicable and is up in the air. Putting that aside, the aim of the ICP is instead to have its structural integrity based on a hierarchy of technical functions, filled on the basis of ability, with full centralization and indistinction from the rest of the party. These technical functions, according to this organic conception of the party, are evidently to be retired as soon as they are no longer necessary. How this is determined, and how they are retired is up in the air. The organizational form of this conception is meant to be based solely on its function and nothing else, with no organizational form prefigured. This is, of course, immediately something that can be ignored. They specifically aim to prefigure communist society, competition with bourgeois society as a political class party specifically for the proletariat, and prefigure itself as carrying out tasks. All of these, at least at some point in the future. All these necessarily mean that specific organizational forms are necessary, even if in the most general senses. The aim is to be able to create recursions based on the discharge of all functions, with the old recursions that are unnecessary having those within the technical division of labor redeployed to other areas where they are more useful, and all recursions at all times updated and reconstructed to fit the current, developing environment without anticipating future environments and organizing to be fit for those. The ICP itself claims to have produced a centralized structure without statutes, rules, democratic mechanisms, electoralism, or consultation of the rank and file, which we know is incorrect since earlier they admitted to receiving feedback from the rank and file, who also have the ability to intervene in party publications. Bureaucratic apparatuses, disciplinary procedures, expulsions. They do not explain if they mean expulsions from the party or positions or both, or any, quote, selection of especially talented men to positions, end quote. They then define the class party as a party when it carries out and applies in every instance of activity simultaneously the defense and definition of theory and historical analysis, the physical organization of a militant corps, and the intervention and activity in the actual proletarian struggle. However, this definition is weak. It can apply to any adventuristic group, such as the Red Army faction and the like. The question must be a qualitative and quantitative one, such as the degree to which they are embedded within the proletariat. You could not reasonably call the organizations like the Red Army faction or the Blankist movement a political class party, but they carried out all of these activities, right? Their conception of the party does not have phases of development, but rather is only defined as a party once it is fully developed qualitatively, and merely needs a quantitative increase in membership that is prepared to absorb, thus requiring pre-built organs in expectation of the future, and this also forgets quantitative developments necessarily lead to qualitative changes. An anticipation that the masses will join the party spontaneously under historically favorable conditions. It's important to note that the party needs to maintain vestigial recursions capable of carrying out actions which it requires at all points through organizational development. This is prefigurative, of course, and involves building recursions when there is no active necessity of them as an act of will and expectation of use later. They also recognize the possibility of the party's activity in any one of these as being able to wane. In reality, if one of these reduces, because they all necessitate the others to function properly, they are all reduced. Abandoning or failure to carry out one aspect of activity loses capacity to carry out all other activities in similar degrees. After all, theoretical work cannot be done without place in the physical struggle. If development ceases, then the organization starts dying, as there is no such thing as a mere quote-unquote defense and protection. Either you are growing and developing, or you are dying. This is the organic creature lesson which should be drawn from this. You know, if your cells are not growing and reproducing and developing, then what does that mean? That means that you are dying. You are slowly perishing over time. At all times, you need to be reproducing yourself. You need to be growing. You need to be developing. And even if you're staying the same, in an evolutionary situation, if we want to go for that, right? What does it mean for a population to remain stagnant while other populations around them are growing? It means that you're being outcompeted, and eventually others are going to enter into your ecological niche and start pressuring you, and if you are not able to stop being stagnant, then you're going to go extinct. It's just that simple. Continuing, the party seeks a continuous dialectical connection between its various tasks and functions in its real-life activity. And upon doing so, it develops, diversifies, and achieves a structure in support of these daily activities, which develops alongside those in increasing complexity, thus removing any conservative elements that cling to improper or superseded organizational tools. In terms of centralism, the party should be unitary without division between those engaged in theoretical work and those engaged in militant work. Hence, all party members should be involved directly or indirectly with all aspects of party work. Thus, the party seeks unitarism and the organic development and reseeding of the various organs of the party to engage in the various necessary kinds of work. For example, we can't just copy-paste an organizational demand that one section has, for example, the connection to trade unions, to another section which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with unions. They have a section talking about the need to reject needing to know how many people are doing what kinds of work at any given time. But such claims are actually so stupid, I'm not even going to summarize them and just say this. Any and every organization should be regularly auditing itself and its various functions so it can understand its own structure and activities. This involves taking stock of labor resources. Moving on. The party's organizational boundaries in terms of tactics and norms must be strict and formulated, adhering to development of theory embedded within Marxist praxis, not individuals going off and doing their own thing. And all individuals in the party must have rigid basis in understanding the organizational and tactical questions through praxis they have carried out at the direction of the party. This further supports the rejection of fusions of organizations. They also reject any sort of allowances for national differences or softness to take advantage of momentary circumstances at the cost of principles. For example, allowing a non-proletarian organization like a bourgeois national liberation organization entrance claim on the name of communists. They claim that by having proper organizational structure and tactics which are actively adhered to and not abandoned, those who do not accept them will leave as soon as they realize that they have no shot taking the action they desire, and as such, according to them, no criticism or self-criticism or any such internal auditing is needed. This assertion, of course, is completely incorrect and functionally requires everyone to be making sure everyone at all times is adhering to the party line. Simply by not having official processes for something does not remove it, as they very clearly understand, and that's essentially their entire basis, right? But rather, auditing, disciplining, criticism is now carried out at all times by everyone towards everyone, but without structures to make determinations on validity or due process or the like. There's reasons that we build up these structures, so you don't result in some sort of witch hunts and all sorts of problems internally. Processes are in fact useful tools. Sometimes those tools don't work because the conditions are different, but you need to have formal automatic processes that work. Okay, continuing. It must be remembered that the fundamental role and function of the party is to keep the workers as forces deployed on the movement's own general line of direction towards the final goal, not to dictate the specific line or goal. The party is there for the workers to use, not to operate outside the workers for its own ends. Anything that harms that goal is harmful to the party, and thereby the revolution, whatever its declarations. The party itself continuously develops as an organization that is part of history in accordance with social forces, with tactics the party needs to carry out developing with circumstances, and the necessary tactics carried out by the party changing the party itself. The question of tactics themselves is fundamentally what allows greater influence of the party amongst the masses, while allowing the character of the party to be compromised in its ability to lead the masses to the final objectives. For example, any sort of belief that the party can conquer power via legal means, or aligns with bourgeois governments at war. Hence, tactics such as absenteeism, class opposition upheld at all times during war, aimed to turn imperialist war between states into a civil war between classes via revolutionary defeatism. Hence, they struggled against dangerous tactics, including the United Front and the workers' government slogan, organizational errors such as mergers or fusions, an allowance of quote-unquote sympathizers to join the Comintern, and opportunism, including processes of criticism and self-criticism, which are understood as harmful for proper discipline. The ICP then declares the development of new tactical maneuvers in the face of developments of within capitalism as revisionism and quote-unquote voluntaristic, on grounds of those developing new ones trying to quote force the pace of history with new praxis, end quote. This conception, of course, would easily and immediately invalidate any and all revolutionary struggles on the grounds that we should simply wait for the rate of profit to reach zero. If developing new tactics is voluntaristic on grounds as trying to force the pace of history, then no tactics can be developed in the first place, and any and all tactics at all are necessarily voluntaristic. There's no basis to draw any sort of quote-unquote line in the development of historical theory and say that you have now the quote-unquote complete set at this particular year or council meeting. It's ridiculous. They also claimed that capitalism during periods of change would require new tactics, which would require new tactics, would simply return to the previous character, equilibrium. This is anti-Marxist, of course. The equilibrium has been changed as developments change. There's a new equilibrium point with new contradictions and weaknesses. It is pure idealism to think that capital could return to a previous point of development. They claim that an organization which is homogeneous and situated within doctrine and program, with clearly stated unitary principles and aims, has no need for democratic mechanisms, because everyone can be assumed to be in agreement so long as they carry out their tasks. This is, of course, a profoundly silly statement, starting from the conception that simply, quote-unquote, clearly stating something means that is understood by everyone, while also containing a sort of Lockean conception of agreement, wherein simply because you are part of the organization means that you agree with everything it is doing. Of course, they intimate aim at expulsion of anyone who disagrees with their decided tactics anyway. In reality, there are all sorts of organizations that carry out their tasks throughout all sorts of ways, with or without consultation of their membership. Them being potentially able to do such does not make them special. Any system incapable of reproducing itself, which is done through continuous activity, will quickly cease being. There's no necessary basis to make the claim that theirs does survive this situation within clearly stated doctrine and program. In addition, they call for communist parties to be formed on a homogeneous basis, applying a single set of tactics described as proletarian tactics. This is, of course, a model organization with tactics used in a completely useless way. Strategy would work best as a description word instead. Again, when I was doing this reading, and as you can probably tell as I was going through, I was getting more and more tilted as things went on. How I, as I've said before, conceptualize tactics is in essentially on-the-ground activities carried out by local movements. We're going to do this, and it's going to be done in this way. And here's who's going to be involved in it, and so on and so forth. The tactics that are carried out by military. As opposed to strategy, which is on a higher level, and then of course there's other levels within military tactics as well. You've got your grand strategy, which is your policy. This would be your principles. Then you've got the institutional level of war. And I'm not too great at this sort of stuff, so please work with me. And if anybody has any critiques of this, then don't put up with me. I've currently got another screen open and I'm reading off of that. And that the institutional level is based on the strategic, which is the level of war which as a group of nations determines national or multinational strategic security objectives and guidance, then develops and uses national resources to achieve those objectives. Then you've got your theater strategic, which are the combatant commands. These are what I would term what they conceptualize as tactics, right? Things like revolutionary defeatism and the like. Then you've got operational. This is the level at which campaigns and major operations are planned, conducted, and sustained to achieve strategic objectives within theaters or other operational areas. Then, underneath that, you've got tactical, which is the level of war which battles and engagements are planned and executed to achieve military objectives assigned to tactical units or task forces. And then at the very bottom, you've got the technical, which is individuals and equipment. My understanding of tactics is quite distinct from the understanding that they have. It's more along the lines of operational or theater strategic in my understanding. So there was quite a breakdown in communication between myself and the text here. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Continuing. This is, of course, a model organization with tactics used in a completely useless way. Strategy would work best as a description word instead. Of course, again, they use strategy and program as effective synonyms. Just keep that in mind. As they're calling for all communist parties to follow the strategy which best suits the international proletariat, condemning any other strategies based on this singular one as the strategies of other classes. Also, they claim that the organic method aims at the development of homogeneity in tactical and organizational fields. If such is a possible product, then there's no basis to claim that there's not a quote, most fit organizational model which can be prefigured based on prior experience. A scientifically derived model organization, in other words. As usual, this finds itself necessarily leading into the exact same results that other systems have come to the recognition of through trial and error, but they seek to continue the trial and error across the whole organization, rather than determining a solid dynamic system, achieving a solid dynamic system through unspoken reality, whilst claiming lack of certain organizational structure. The World Communist Party itself needs a basis in proletarian theory, principles and goals that are recognized as valid and unchanging by all of its members. Deduced from these principles are a single program and set of tactical norms, are known to all militants as their shared heritage, which they can then compare their current orders with to determine correctness, and, of their own will and without possibility of discipline, can choose to ignore the proposed tactic and instead continue with what they had been doing before. They can't do something new. They can either do what they were doing before, or they can go with what they were ordered to do. The party also rejects fusions, instead only accepting members as individuals, and rejects national or local exceptions. The ICP claims that such an organization doesn't have internal political struggle, but in reality all that happens with the people who disagree is that they leave because they have no way of establishing a basis for pushing their ideas through with anything new being declared as voluntaristic, or somehow being recognized as simply a quote-unquote clarification. Not intuition or inspiration, oh no, clarification. And managing to cycle through such that everyone agrees on it, regardless of its applicability to their specific conditions. Some people may think this is a good thing, but if we're looking at community seeking knowledge, that's not how research happens at all. I could not call this a scientific organization. Next up, we have some discussion on the party hierarchy. These are determined solely by the ability of an individual to carry out the duties of a position. They do not specify how someone who is more capable ends up in that position instead of somebody less capable, or the process of removing someone from a position. I assume that's left in the hands of the individual organ that's involved in it. I don't know. They aim for an organizational structure that is robust enough to have anyone from any viewpoint in position, so long as they carry out their duties. An example of this would be in the workplace. It doesn't matter your personal views, because the structure of your job is such that it does not change how you carry out your duties. This is indeed something that should be generally aimed for, but necessarily does not work for all activities. There are many roles wherein the viewpoint of the individual is absolutely key to the work at hand. For example, any sort of human-facing activity or leadership position. With this structure aimed for, it should generally no longer be important who is carrying out the duties, and it becomes possible to black box those functions and simply act as if they're conflicting with the traditional life, if their orders are timely and relevant, and if they're carrying it out to the best of their ability in conformity with the party line. Of course, to determine if someone's doing something to the best of their ability, the individual carrying out the duty must be known. Ergo, audit processes. Alright, in this robust organization with commonly agreed tactics and program, there are no arguments about the doctrine, program, or core tactics. Internal relations are joint and shared work that all party members participate in, aiming to develop the best solutions to the conditions, while theoretical cornerstones are made clear and tactical lines are honed. Common principles, tactics, and examinations of situation the party is in are analyzed to produce the most efficient organizational tools in such a way that coordinates the party's activities as a whole. In support of this, the party has an intense process of educating new members through practical action at the party's direction in accordance with scientific research, with results that are within the boundaries of the party rather than consultations to understand membership's opinions. This, of course, immediately runs into a brick wall as soon as one consults, why local organizations are not carrying out demanded activities emergent from this scientific research. And they respond that they lack resources or specialized recognition for their limitations based on their external and internal conditions, and thus had no capacity to carry out those actions. And all the party said was confusing and counterproductive. And if they had simply looked into the local organization and asked the people, then these problems would have never come up, because the best way to learn what somebody needs is to simply ask, rather than assuming you know. But that's democracy, right? That's consultation of the rank and file, and we can't have that. We're organic. Everybody's supposed to know everything that's going on all at once, all the time. Yeah. In addition, this robust organization does not blame individuals for failure, but instead looks into the organizational structures and processes, audits them, that allows the mistake to occur in the first place. Fundamentally, authority rests with information, appropriate focus of knowledge for a given decision, and that people agree to abide by the decisions made. And thus this authority, via centralization, requires that the center have maximal knowledge or ability to delegate knowledge, gathering to lower, more local recursions. Anyone who is engaging in individualism are forced out of the party initially by bureaucratic means, but as the party develops, eventually any ability to express individualism such as careerism, anarchism, contrarianism, being a windbag, that would be me, rip me, etc., will be unable to express those feelings. And any organs that attract those sorts of people are analyzed to establish a process of reconstruction of the organizational structures and features in such a way that will no longer attract them, but instead only genuine revolutionary militants. In terms of factionalism, the party must remember that there can be multiple answers to any given tactical problem, which can result in disagreements between groups of militants. They claim that these disagreements are not political in nature because any solution that ends up being selected is within the principles and core tactics. Obviously, this cannot be the case, because if it were so, then politics would have come to an end within bourgeois states by this definition, as all results, regardless of the process, are within the shared interests of the bourgeoisie. This is obviously not the case, and the party itself is in the midst of a continuous class struggle and attempts at negatively transcending the bourgeois society through its negation. With that aside, though, the solution to what stands between multiple potential answers to tactical problems should be the result of scientific study, an inherently political process in this case, once again, not a consultation of the majority or some leadership assumed to have the correct answer. Of course, authority itself rests with information, and necessarily the center will tend to have the most information, as is the coordinator and nexus of the various recursions, and the local recursion's own center will likewise have high fidelity knowledge comparatively of the situation. They seek to maintain the party's tactical, programmatic, and theoretical homogeneity and avoid contradictions, but do finally recognize that there are circumstances wherein the party has no choice but to contradict these. In other words, they change their tactics in response to external environmental conditions. Yeah. Finally, at the end of it all, they just say, oh yes, actually, we do change tactics. They're not homogeneous, and we do recognize the particular material conditions. They're not all universal. It's exhausting going through all of this, and essentially they continue to say, oh, we don't do this. They make these grandiose claims. Oh no, the ICP so principled and never puts out anything that goes against these universal things that we have determined and we've cut off at this point arbitrarily. There's no more new tactics to be had. Oh, and also nobody ever develops any new tactics. It's all clarifications and so on and so forth. And then eventually they're just like, yeah, we also recognize tactical responses to external environmental changes. It's not interesting or fun, and it just leads to confusion and all these other things that they say that they're fighting against. We need to be talking concretely, and we need to be talking seriously, not this sort of stuff. I call myself a windbag. If you actually go in and look at the audiobook recordings I made of this, these people are absolute windbags. I'm putting this in 30-minute videos, maybe an hour long for the summaries. These are supposed to be the core tenets of this party, and I'm adding in a bunch of additional stuff on top of it. But it takes them so long to express it. In comparison, let's give Lenin as a comparison real quick. Every single line by Lenin, when I'm reading about the party or anything along those lines, every single sentence has to actually be engaged with, because all of it is concrete, all of it is direct, all of it is talking about something that is happening. But there's so much stuff in here that can be broken down from entire paragraph to less than a sentence. It's so many times. So many times. Gosh. All right. Again, they admit to the necessity to change tactics under certain conditions. They then claim that the results of changes in any of these will be the development of internal dissent, currents, and potential factions. But this is putting the cart before the horse. This is because the drive to change tactics, program, and theory come from the development of these in response to changing external conditions. Changing tactics does not produce dissent any more than the victim of a bully being caught by a teacher fighting back causes the initial conflict. At all times, conditions will change, and the party needs to have a process for responding to those changes which is known by all. What produces internal dissent, currents, and potential factions is the party failing due to becoming ossified, thus producing groups that seek internal change so that they are not working off of an out-of-date approved technology matrix produced by a center which rejects any sort of recognition of their localized needs. Instead, what is needed is that the party's tactical homogeneity needs to have an embedded basis and process for change, so that everyone knows what to do in the face of changing conditions. The party must have a theory of historical movement, of historical change, the theory of historical dialectics applied to the party as a dialectically unified party that keeps in mind all the different parts, the principles, the theory, the praxis, the organizational structure, the tactics, the operations, the rules of operation, the program/strategy, the quote-unquote doctrine, even though I don't think that it's necessary to establish as a doctrine because it's part of the principles, right? If materialism is a principle of communism in its basis, then that kind of means that the conception of communism is a principle, right? Because communism as a theory of historical development emerging out of the conditions created by capitalism, right? Okay. So we can recognize all the interconnections of all these different aspects of it, and utilizing our experiences and our minds and so on and so forth, we can prefigure. We can say, this is the kind of organization that we need. This is how it should function. This is the best way scientifically. And these are the various operations that need to be carried out. And in order to carry those out, these are the tactical maneuvers that should best fit those operations, which support the strategy that is elucidated within our program, right? All of these things are interconnected with one another. You can't take any of these things on their own and extract it out of them. All right. In response to changing conditions and thereby demands to change tactical actions, the party must not repress the dissension and undergo a process of clarification of cornerstones via objective research. There, upon the completion of such research, make clear to the whole party the resultant analysis and elaboration of theory and praxis, with the new tactical action directives having a process of transition to them included in the explanation. The party itself acts as a recursion of the proletarian class itself, synthesizing its fundamental class struggle theoretically and materially from all potential sources via solid foundation in theory, principles, and program, international in character due to the world market making the proletarian struggle international. This synthesis includes all stages of class struggle, including anticipation of future developments, through inclusion of historic knowledge. I must be missing something here. Or maybe that was a stray word. Sorry. This ability to forecast the development of the class struggle, at least in general terms, is absolutely necessary, as it needs to be able to establish directives and tactics as a result of its predictions, so as to take advantage of all situations, especially, for instance, quote-unquote double revolutions and quote-unquote pure proletarian revolutions. noting the different tactics involved in different forms of class struggles. In conclusion, the sum of all the party's functions should be harmonious and fully connected without internal conditions, with the organizational principle being centralism. The need for such centralism was determined by the aims of the organization itself, that being the liberation of the working class, ergo the construction of communism, which necessarily requires internationalism and long-term thinking. The need for both of these thus requires the organization to be structured in a way that maximizes its capacity to carry these out. And emergent from this is, according to the ICP, a need for an invariant program which does not change. The need for a full continuity of action in response to historical changes. The party must be at all times a real historical force which has a stable orientation and class struggle, united throughout by doctrine, program, and tactics in the defense thereof. In this conception, means and ends are inseparable, because if tactics, the means, become opportunist, then they stay that way because you can't change them. Throughout this, they never explain the fundamental question of what the process is for decision making, instead presenting it as a question of, quote, who makes the decisions, claiming that the entirety of the organization makes all decisions about everything, despite claiming to not consult them. Because everyone is familiar with the program, doctrine, and tactics and accepts or rejects orders on the basis of that understanding. The party takes form in response to the material needs of the working class to achieve their aims, and following that, the party takes the form it needs to carry out the tasks necessary to achieve these aims. And therefore, in the ICP's analysis, the party does not function on any inherited systems or model organizations. Of course, this conception ignores historical development, and that because there has been a determination through historical experience that the political class party is necessary, that means that we can say things about the organizational form a priori in this sense. In the same way, we can come to determinations about the character of this political class party. The party, according to this, creates organs, as to say, recursions for the execution of its duties, and when such are no longer needed, they are immediately dismantled or recreated, with no explanation about the process by which this occurs. Was determined necessary or unnecessary, or how it determines how well any given recursion fits the environment. They claim that you can determine the real recursion's form for a particular purpose or environment either beforehand or after. And while this is true to some degree, that you cannot anticipate with full knowledge about all necessary structural forms, there are all sorts of things that you can know are necessary, such as the need for these recursions to interface with other recursions, to maintain their ethos, to have some system of internal auditing, which will do things like determining the best way to integrate all militants into their best places in the party, and so on. There are many, in fact, universal, general things that can be determined by the capacity of the organization and from the environment itself before the recursion is in place. And history itself is a teacher, as are the aims of the party. The organizational form itself, we know, must be at all times squarely faced against the bourgeois system and planted firmly in class terrain. Hence, I would like to put forward the existence of a dialectically unified Communist Party of the working class. This party maintains a dynamic feedback loop between its real-life activity and its organizational structure, its programs, strategy, its tactics and rules of operation, its doctrine and theory, its revolutionary aim, its praxis, guiding principles, internal conditions, including the rank and file composition, the external environment, etc., etc. This party applies historical lessons to determine optimal configurations for these elements and understands how they dialectically influence and transform each other, ensuring constant adaptation and development in service of proletarian revolution, reproducing itself materially in such a way that maintains dynamic equilibrium, and thus adapting to changing conditions while staying true to its revolutionary core. This would recognize the necessity of direct and continuous feedback through consultation of the rank and file of activities and necessities, while gathering as much information as possible rather than immediately blackboxing every recursion below the center, and aim to be an active agent of history and seek to influence the external environment in ways favorable to all other aspects, through all other aspects. This dialectically unified party is significantly divergent in theoretical basis compared to the organic centralist model, which I will be addressing in its own video out of a compilation of my analyses of their words describing it and critiques of it. I already talked about that. That will happen after this particular series within this larger series is done. And on the note, that is the end of my summary of the Communist Party and the Tradition of the Left, Part 4, Party Development and Organic Centralism. As usual, if you'd like to go through my notes in preparation for this summary, you can go into the description below and you'll find a link to this Google Doc, which includes all the quotation extracts I took for this. You'll also find a link to the United Marxist Pact Discord server if you'd like to talk about this and I guess defend your party. If you're an ICP member or something along those lines, have at it. We'll be happy to have you. Tomorrow we will be going over part 5 of this text, Tactics. With that said, thank you for joining me for today's topical summary, and I hope to see you then.